All right, it is 2 p.m. Eastern, so we're going to get started. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for day 2 of the 2021 Virtual Christmas Summit, sponsored by Boscoyo Studio. All of the presentations in this room are specifically sponsored by Light-O-Rama. Our next presentation is Troubleshooting 101, Common Problems and How to Solve Them by Seth Jones, who taught for us yesterday. During the presentation, please do not unmute yourself or start your video. You're welcome to use the chat to ask relevant questions about the presentation, since other attendees or the host might be able to answer your questions, but please save all of the questions directed at Seth for the end of the presentation during the Q&A. At that point, you'll be allowed to unmute yourself to ask questions or put them in chat. Thank you so much for attending, and Seth, take it away.
Thanks, Aubrey. Hello, everyone. How are y'all today? I am Seth, as Aubrey has pointed out, and my parents so decided. Today, I want to go over some troubleshooting. Also, I have dogs here today. Going over some troubleshooting tips and ideas and whatnot for your Light-O-Rama system, and also just your light show in general. It doesn't have to be specific to Light-O-Rama. A lot of the stuff I've included here is kind of specific to Light-O-Rama. But also I've tried to make it to where it's not just that. But so about me, in case you weren't in any of the classes I taught yesterday, my name is Seth Jones. I live in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, way down south in the land of never-ending summer. I've been a big fan of Christmas light shows ever since the original Carson Williams video with the Wizard in Winter song went viral, 2005, 2004. I've been obsessed ever since. Got my own show in 2014, and I've never looked back. I'm a nerd for just about everything geeky, and we named our show. So my show is called JP Christmas Lights. We named it after my last name, and my husband's last name is Jones and Plaza. So there we are. You can see my show at facebook.com/JP Christmas Lights. So troubleshooting with Light-O-Rama, we're going to talk about 3 things today, or 3 types of categories of things. We're going to talk about some essential tools that I think are essential, and a lot of us in the field think are essential for troubleshooting and maintaining your show. And then we're going to talk some about some common failures you see and how to solve them. By no means will we cover all of them, because there's a never-ending in-stream supply of failures. So it's more about finding out how to solve it than it is a list of solutions. And then also we're going to talk about getting help from the community, whether it be online or locally, in terms of troubleshooting and whatnot like that, because, you know, if you can't solve it yourself, you're going to need some help, and that's kind of important. So the first thing I want to talk about is troubleshooting and maintenance and tools to keep on hand for that, especially once you get the show up and running. So I don't know if she's here, but Stacy Boatman is an active member in a lot of the community Facebook groups and things. She has a very large show down in Texas, and she always posts this helpful tip every winter about the emergency kit you should have on hand for when your show is running. And in it, she has a long list, and I added a few things I think should be in there as well. But basically, I'm not going to read through all of these because that's a long list. But basically the idea is that this is your do not touch bucket or whatever container you use, that you can carry with you when you go to do any repairs that you might need to do on your show live. Some of the things I do want to flag that we will talk a little bit more about are the network cable testing tool and the multimeter and the outlet tester. And there's, you know, lots of spare items and things like that. So as Stacy says, once you set this kit up, make it clear to your family during lighting season, don't touch the bucket. This is, you know, your toolkit, and you need to know where your stuff is. So it'll save you a lot of steps. So the first thing I want to dive into with, you know, tools and things, you know, everybody knows how to use a screwdriver and things like that. One of the super helpful items is to have a outlet tester on hand. They're super cheap. You can pick them up anywhere. They come in all different shapes and sizes and styles. It's helpful because if you have something acting up, one of your controllers or what have you, one of the first questions is the outlet working right? And you can use the outlet tester, just plug it in, it lights up, or however the particular one you have works. And you can, you know, quickly and easily find out, you know, if your controllers have power. I'm gonna come back in a little while and talk about what we can use the multimeter for. It's a little bit helpful in terms of troubleshooting in the field, I guess you'd say, on your show. But where I find it is the absolute most useful is when you're building custom cables with the vampire plugs. So if you have things acting up, it might be helpful to use the multimeter to test your cables in the field as well. And then finally, a network cable tester. I didn't really take this seriously for quite a while, and then last year I finally got one, and I was like, oh, I get it now. The difference being, just like with extension cords and vampire plugs, which I hope you're familiar with, making your own custom extension cord cables. You can do the same thing with network cables and also save a bunch of money. It's really easy to do, but it's also a little bit fiddly because those wires are about the size of a thread. And so you use this to test and make sure you built your wire correctly. And it's just super easy to do, and it gives you confidence that it's done correctly. So, oh, and here's the crimping tool that you would use to build your own network cables. It's a little bit of time to learn the mechanics of it and get sort of the dexterity down, but it saves a lot of effort for me in the long run of trying to constantly go get new cables and buy expensive ones when I can just get a giant roll of wire and make my own. I'm not going to dive into how to use the light keeper, but if you're running an AC show, whether it be incandescent or LEDs, but basically a non-pixel show, the LED keeper is super helpful in terms of repair. For the AC strings, for the incandescent strings, it's absolutely worth its weight in gold. With LED, it's a little bit less valuable. It really just depends on how much time and effort you want to invest. I personally think it's absolutely worth it because I can use it in the off season to fix strings that are half out, or at least find out what's wrong with them and decide if I want to keep those strings. It's helpful to have on hand in case you have, for me, I try and have backups of everything just to swap out if something goes bad. But in case you don't have a replacement string, you can maybe use your LED keeper to get that light set back up and running for your show if it dies in the middle of the season. So those are a quick sprint through some tools that I think are really helpful to have on hand. But now let's talk about some common failures you see. And by no means, like I said, this is all of them. And I didn't touch the software hardly at all because the Light-O-Rama software is so well documented that if you have a problem or an error message with any of the systems on the software side, if you just go into the help files for the Light-O-Rama software and search what the error message is, you're almost certain to find what the problem is and how to fix it. And if not, if you go into any of the Facebook groups and support groups or the Light-O-Rama forums and do a search for what the error message is, somebody has absolutely already had that problem. And there's going to be a comment section with solutions and probably many times over of that. So some of the hardware show side, some of the problems you see, one is a damaged RJ45 jack or the network cable jack or the Ethernet jack. Light-O-Rama controllers have a bad habit of being delicate there. And so it's very common to see a RJ45 jack go bad. Here's a couple examples. If you look at the right-hand photo, you'll see that one of the pins is bent. And then here in the middle photo as well, you can see some of the pins are up and some of the pins are down. And then on the left-hand side, you see they're not quite as far down. Your wire might still make connection, might not. It might be touch and go. And then you can see on the bottom how it should be, where all of the pins are angled and all the way to the top. So if you're setting up your show and you're having issues with getting the controller to connect, it's absolutely worth checking this. And it might be that you have a bad network cable. Not usually. Once they're set, usually network cables are good unless they've gotten broken or something. But if you're I don't know what's wrong, check your network jack and see if it's bent. If you're brave and you've got good dexterity, you can slide a tiny something like, I don't know, maybe a paper clip under there and lift them back up. I've never done that personally myself. I'm not quite that brave, but you can also easily replace them. I have also not yet done that. I will be doing that at some point this summer. You can swap out the jack on the board with just a little bit of soldering. From what I've read, it takes about 30 minutes, and the part is about $1.50. But let's say you're setting up your show or you're in the middle, your show's up and running and somebody trips over the cable or something, and now you've got a busted jack. How do you deal with that? You don't have time to go soldering. The quickest fix is a Ethernet splitter. I 1000% recommend that you have 2 or 3 of these on hand, just on standby. And then, excuse me, what you can do is every Light-O-Rama controller has, or at least the AC controllers have 2 Ethernet jacks. And so you can just take the good one, plug in the splitter, and voila, you're good to go. Again, you can fix it just like that and then save the work from the off season. And then if it's just maybe only barely making connection, here's another. I went through like all the Facebook groups and looked for, things people did to fix it. Here's a clever one, I thought. It was working, but only if you held it in just the right position. So zip ties will hold it at least for the season, right? That'll do. But the best thing to do to prevent the damage is going to be strain relief. So basically, you want to do whatever you can to prevent the network jack from getting damaged from excess weight pulling on it, somebody tripping over the wire, things like that. So one thing you can do is get these little 3-inch extensions. They're available all over every electronics website. They're not super expensive. And this won't necessarily rescue your controller from being damaged if somebody yanks or trips on the wire. But what it will do is it'll give you some insurance for when you're unplugging and replugging, over the years that you're plugging into the second one, not the primary plug. And so if this messes up, that's fine. You can swap out that wire super easy. It's a lot easier to change. So it gives you an extra part that's easy to swap out. For better prevention of damaging the jacks from yanking, there's a bunch of different ways you can do it. You can see here they rolled up the network wire into a little coil and zip tied it to the rest of the wire. So if somebody yanks on it, it's just going to stop right there at the bottom, and the pressure is not going to yank on the network jack. And then here, this person tied the network cable around the post where they mount the controller. So it's just going to yank on the post, and again, not on your circuit board. So those are things you can do to prevent or alleviate issues with the jack itself. Something else you'll see sometimes is a damaged network cable. Maybe there's an animal, depending on where you live, that's a ongoing problem, is chipmunks or squirrels or deer, things like that. So your network cable might have gotten damaged, or maybe if you're doing building your own network cables, maybe you accidentally miswired one. So it's a very common thing to see sometimes, especially during setup time period. Just swap it out with a new one, repair the old one, and when you have time, and you're good to go. Another thing we see pretty commonly when people are having shows that aren't acting like they're supposed to is one of their controllers isn't configured with the right unit ID number. And it's a little bit tricky because depending on what model of controller you have and what generation it is, the controller ID number is set a couple of different ways. So some shows or some controllers will let you set a unit ID with the hardware utility, and it will remember it for a little while it's still powered up. But then as soon as it powers down, it's going to revert back to a default. And that's because those controllers, the unit ID is set with a hardware dial or dip switches maybe that are mounted on the circuit board of the controller itself. So if you're having issues where you can tell your show is like not doing the right controller, you've done the diagnosis and looked at and it's behaving like just another controller, or behaving exactly like the other controller, so you can tell it's becoming controller 1 again instead of staying controller 5, for example. Check the hardware model which is going to be printed on the circuit board on your controller. And it's going to give, say, CTP16V3 or G3 or something like that. So you'll be able to tell what model and generation it is. And then you can go to Light-O-Rama's website, and they actually have a web page dedicated specifically to how to set controller IDs for all of their equipment, for the regular AC controllers and all the other ones as well. And so you just look up which controller you have, and it shows you how to correctly set that unit ID for the future. Another thing that people sometimes have issues with, it doesn't really have a good name. I call it power bleed. This is not as common with newer generation controllers, but it can happen sometimes. It was more common with some of the older controllers, but as we know, Light-O-Rama builds tanks with these controllers. So they're indestructible, and you still see lots of the old controllers around. With the older controllers, like I said, it's more common. What you see basically is if you have a channel that is all LED, because LED pulls so little electricity, the controller might not realize that it's on or off. It's not detecting any power pull because the lights pull so little electricity. And so what happens is the lights will have just a tiny bit on. There's a couple of different things that can cause that. But if you have, a situation where you have just this one channel that's either not turning off or it's turning on sometimes, but not all the time, one of the first things I would check is to make sure that it's not because the LED power is just too low. It might be a bad part called a triac. Again, that doesn't happen as much with LEDs nowadays. It was more of a problem when you had incandescents. But if it's a case where it's power bleed, basically all you got to do is add something else to that channel that pulls a little bit of electricity. I don't know if this is the official name, but the nickname for them, they call them snubbers. Basically, you could do something like a Glade scented candle warming thing. I don't know how I super feel. A lot of people do that. I'm not super sure how I feel about that because it's like a heating thing in the yard, I think. So I don't know, but maybe add like one single C9 incandescent light somewhere or something like that. And what that'll do is that's going to pull just enough electricity to trigger the electronics correctly. And this one's not specific to controllers, but it's something you see a lot of people talk about. So I figured it was worth throwing in here to discuss. And that is FM transmitter issues. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here because I think they've actually had a whole nother workshop on that yesterday for audio. So go to the YouTube page for the virtual Christmas summit and look for the audio quality tutorial if you want to dive into this deeply. But on a quick note, for FM transmitters, they're really sensitive to radio interference, which is one of our big things, not just with the FM transmitters, but even with the channels and the network data transfer as well, where if the data wires and the power wires overlap with the antenna, you might see some interference and things like that. So if you're having bad transmission issues and whatnot with your FM transmitter, or if you're having data issues with your controller and you can't find anything wrong, same thing applies there. Separate your cables, try and keep honestly, it's a good thing to try and do anyway. Keep your network cables away from the power cables as much as you can. And then with the FM transmitter, try and keep the radio antenna separately as well. And that clears out a whole lot of issues. My first year at my new house that I live in now, I had everything literally lying on the ground in a giant rat's nest, and nothing was working right. And I could not for the life of me figure it out. And then I found a network cable underneath a stack of power cables that went from controller 1 to controller 2. And there was no data getting through because it was just getting drowned out by all the power bleed through interference. So here's a fun one for us. Water intrusion is something that you're just not going to get around unless maybe you live in Arizona or San Diego or something like that. And it's extremely controversial, and it's always a hot topic because there's corners you can cut, there's tricks you can pull to make your show run better even when it's raining. But some of those things might also be dangerous, and it just depends on who you ask and what risks they are willing to take. Basically, the issue is your GFCI breakers. If you have them on your house, they're designed to trip at the first moment of it detecting power loss coming from your cable, like bleeding out somewhere else, because that means that there's a short circuit and so it cuts the power. But when it rains and things like that, sometimes the controller, not the controllers, but the light fixtures, because the wire is so thin, you might see power just sort of leak a little bit from the wire. That's kind of a fuzzy, weird concept, but it's a thing. It's called power leakage. It's very, very, very tiny amounts, but it might be enough in total to make your breaker trip. But more often it's because water has gotten in somewhere. And with, you know, 1,000,001 plugs all over the place, it's hard to miss. If you have issues with the water intrusion, and you have GFCI, you will hear a lot of people talk about how they got rid of their GFCI outlets and now everything runs fantastic. And I mean, I'm happy for them, but it's something I can't recommend because it is a building code thing. Some places, if not everywhere, I'm not an electrician, so I don't know if it's an everywhere thing or not, but there's absolutely a thing for, you know, outdoor outlets needing to have protection. And if you change that, you know, that might be a code violation, who knows? Also, it's a risk because now if something really goes wrong, you're losing a layer of protection there. So it's if it's something you choose to do, it's absolutely do at your own risk, but, you know, consult with electricians and learn what that is before you make drastic changes like that. I personally choose to live by the life of, well, if it's raining and the show won't run, I guess that's just the world telling us that we're not going to run the show tonight. Because I just don't, you know, I don't want to risk it. But in terms of things you can do to prevent or at least reduce your issues with water intrusion, one of the things that you can do is what's called drip loops, especially for things that are suspended on like the roof line and stuff. And a drip loop literally is just a small loop at the end of the wire right before you plug it in somewhere, where the water that's running down the wire will go to the bottom of the loop and drip off rather than going into your outlet or your connection or your house or what have you. Some people use silicone gaskets in between each of their plugs, or there's, I believe, I forget what they call it, high electric grease. Basically, there's an electrical grease you can also use, and I completely just forgot the name of that grease. Some people swear by it and they say it works wonderfully. Other people try it and say it doesn't work at all. Honestly, that applies to all of these water intrusion tips. None of them will guaranteed work. Oh, thank you. Yes, dielectric grease. That's the right word, Matthew. Thank you. None of these water prevention tips will stop your water problem. It might help. It might not. It's worth trying if you want to, but none of them are a magic wand, and it may still be an issue. It's just a matter of being cognizant and trying to think through where it might be coming from and process of elimination, things like that. It's worth trying if you want. You know, some people are like, it's too expensive, what have you. Just bear in mind that these are things you can try, but there's no guarantee of success. So silicone gaskets between your plugs should hypothetically help keep water from getting in the connection if you get that good and sealed. Dielectric grease also does that well. You can use baby plug guards to close up the loose ends that don't have connections. They also sell these in silicone versions that are designed for water prevention. On these two specific items, I should note that for every person that says it's wonderful, there's going to be another person that says, yes, but. And for these, the yes, but is that while it does, you know, help protect water from getting into those connections, if water does get into those connections, it keeps it in as well. So it's a two-way street there. And if that's the case, then it's not going to dry out, and that could also be a problem. So, you know, it really just, it just depends on your situation and how it works or doesn't work for you. Another thing a lot of people like, I personally don't find a whole lot of value to these. I would rather use the silicone plugs or maybe some electric tape or something like that. These are a little bit expensive for my taste, but you can buy these. They're all over the hardware stores during the holiday season. They're just little waterproof boxes basically that you can clip around your extension cord plugs. Another downside to these guys specifically is that they're designed for, traditional, I guess we'll say heavy duty extension cords, and, they don't necessarily work as well. They're not designed to fit the zip cable, the SPT wire, the lamp cable that we use to make our custom extension cords. So it might help, again, if you want to try it and spend money, it can't hurt to try, but it might not do you any good. And also, this is another case where it should keep the water out, absolutely, but if water does get in, it's going to keep the water in. So be mindful of that. So when it comes down to finding things that are wrong, it really kind of comes down to the process of elimination. You want to find where something is going wrong. And this applies whether you're setting up your first show, setting up new equipment for the first time, setting up your show for the season, or maybe just something went wrong mid-season. It's really just a case of saying, where is it broken? And then finding the things that are in that zone, you might say, that might be interfering. So in this case, for my example here, let's pretend that you've got your show set up and everything's working except for the last controller. It's not powering up, or it's not doing this, or it's just not doing whatever it is you want it to do. So at this point, then my bubble of failure is somewhere between the next to last and last controller. So it could be the network jack on the second to last controller that leads to the last controller. It could be the wire. It could be the network jack on the last controller. It could be power supply to the last controller. There's 1,001 things it could be. But now we know where to start looking. So what I would recommend is find that bubble and start making like a list, whether you do it physically or in your head or what have you. Like, look at all of the things that might go wrong, especially think about the things that you move or touch every season during setup. All of the plugs, all of the net cables, things that you're physically plugging and unplugging would be the first things I would check. So bear in mind, when I'm saying a failure here, it might not be something that's broken. It might just be something came unplugged. It might be, like I was saying earlier, you've got interference. I'm using the word failure here very loosely. It's just something not doing the way it's supposed to. So now that you know where your problem is, and you're like, well, it's gonna be one of these things, pick the low-hanging fruit first. Go for the obvious things and go for the easy things, because if it is that, well, it's easy to fix. So like, use your outlet tester, make sure it's got power. Use your network cable tester to make sure the cable is, in good condition. I'll show you that in a little bit. I've got one I'll demonstrate. Use a different network cable to make sure that it's not, one of the other controllers. And so for the parts you can swap out easily, like a network cable or an extension cord, if you can, try that. Look for those kinds of easy fix failures before you start digging into, complicated things like moving an entire controller and having to replug everything in. Oftentimes, in my experience, it's usually that one of the extension cords has gotten unplugged somewhere along the line. And that's a good point also. I'm talking to myself here. If you have a daisy chain of extension cords, let's say in this case, it's the last controller in a line that half of it's not lit up, but everything else is working, and you look at the extension cord it's plugged into and it's plugged in fine. Well, make sure you check the other end of the extension cord as well. And if it's plugged in, check to make sure that nothing has chewed or torn or destroyed that extension cord. It's very possible that the lawnmower got it, or an animal got it halfway down the line. So it's definitely a hunt and peck in a kind of way. But it's just be methodical, go one thing at a time. If it's not that one, go to the next one. And if it's something like really complicated and difficult to find, actually write down a list, because that's going to help you remember what you've gone through already. Because eventually you're going to reach out to somebody and say, hey, can you help? And they're going to ask what you do. And now you're hoping you remember everything you've already done and checked. So, and again, when you're swapping things out, make sure you're swapping it with one that you know definitely works. So in this case, I know that the cable between the first and second controller works because the show is running correctly on those. So maybe I'll pull that cable and put it on the next one. The network cable tester basically does the same purposes, but just when you're swapping things out, don't do like I have absolutely done and put something broken in and still wonder why it's not working. That was a fun one. So, and again, if you swap something out, it doesn't work, just go to the next one. It's really easy to get overwhelmed with it's not working because in most places of the country and the world, it's cold. Well, I guess half the world. It's cold during Christmas time, and we're setting up, and it's stressful because you want it done. Maybe you're working late at night because you have the full-time job, all these kinds of things. So it's easy to get really overwhelmed with the complexity of everything. But if you just take a breath and be super methodical and straightforward and just one thing at a time, you can work your way down a list. And honestly, and we'll talk about this a little bit more later, check the website with Light-O-Rama. They have, and I say Light-O-Rama first because they made the products. They're the experts. There's a ton of other websites as well, but check that they have a lot of it's not working, what do I do tutorials. And so depending on what your problem is, search the website for it. Very likely you're going to find something. So the next thing is getting help from the community. So you've gone through and it's not working. You can't find out what's wrong with your show. It's not starting up correctly. It's not, doing this, it's not doing that. And you've done all you know what to do. So you're going to, get on Facebook or what have you and ask for help. First and most important thing to remember is everybody else who is going to be able to help you, they're also setting their shows up as well. So be patient. I have absolutely seen people have fits on the internet because people didn't jump in and respond in timely manners. And A, we have jobs in lives and things, and B, we're busy setting up our shows. So, give it some time, be patient, be mindful of that. They're offering you free help. But also, when you ask your questions, wherever you're asking your question, make sure that you give as much information as you can in the first question, because that'll get you a timely answer instead of spending time asking what kind of controllers do you use? What version of Light-O-Rama do you use? I've seen a lot of people over the years that'll post in groups and forums and things and say, half of one of my controllers is out, help. Okay, what kind of controller do you have? When you say it's out, what do you mean? Is it not lighting up? So be as detailed and descriptive as possible when you're asking for help. And I'll come back to more points about that in a minute. But first, I want to pull up a few websites these are some of my go-to websites for reference. Planet Christmas has been around forever. Wow Lights is a Light-O-Rama vendor. And of course, you've got official Light-O-Rama as well. These are really good websites to go and just read and search and learn and just look for information, because they've been around for years and years and years and years. And there's a gold mine of information. So go in, pull up the search function, and just start typing, various ways to phrase your question. If you're not finding a solution, you'll eventually find people that have had the same problem. And then also, absolutely, Facebook groups and things like that are very, very helpful and very important. Local and regional groups, I don't know, I'm sure there's also ones around the world. I'm here in Florida in my America bubble. I'm not familiar with the international groups as much, but I know for a fact there's a Pacific Northwest group, there's a Florida group. I think there's more than one California group based on where you're at in California. I've seen Texas groups. So wherever you're living, look for a group that's in your region And it's a really good resource to be a member of and read through the content throughout the year, not just in the wintertime when you're setting up, because you'll see discussions talking about things like the weather in your area and situations and stuff. And so if you kind of keep an eye on it throughout the year, even if you're not necessarily actively participating yourself, just reading what other people are doing, it will kind of give you just an ongoing bank of knowledge. But also, being that these people are local experts, maybe they can help you out with spare parts or something if something is broken, or maybe they can come help you with diagnosis if it needs more in-person help. But also, they know your weather, they know your geography, they know any specific issues in terms of maybe the animals you got to deal with and how to keep them out of your show, all kinds of things like that. So they're super helpful. And then here's a list of a bunch of other Facebook groups that I think are super helpful. The ones that say Light-O-Rama users, sequence shares, none of these are official Light-O-Rama groups, to be absolutely clear. I don't know, and I'm pretty certain that Light-O-Rama does not have any official Facebook groups. I've not seen any, and I've looked, so I might be wrong, but just go into these knowing and expecting that any advice you're getting here is from other users in the community and not necessarily official Light-O-Rama knowledge. Okay, so yes, Aubrey says they have a Facebook page. Good to know. So some of these other groups that aren't Light-O-Rama groups, you're not going to see a lot of help for Light-O-Rama specific equipment failures, but it's still good places to sit and watch and get more knowledge and see how other hobbyists do their shows as well. I'm a big fan of a slow stream of data and information over time. You can constantly build and learn new things rather than just trying to crunch it all into Christmas time when trying to set up or summertime when you're trying to sequence, things like that. Like, take time over the year and just spend a little bit of time scrolling through and reading, and you'll find some really cool and really interesting things from the community. So going back to when you ask for help, describe your problem as accurately as you can. Don't just say half my controller isn't working. Say it's not turning on, or it's acting erratically, and describe the behavior as precisely as you can. Even if you don't think it's a software problem, it's always worth making a note of what version of Light-O-Rama you're using. You never know; it might be a bug, or it might be something else. What version of Windows? Again, this one's a little less important if you're running the show standalone, not connected to the computer. But again, good to know and helpful to have just in case. Tell them what kind of controller you're having a problem with, because the controller that you're having an issue with, the solution is going to depend on what the device is you're working on, and so we can't help you if we don't know what device is actually broken. Talk about how you run the show. So if half of one of your controllers isn't running, or maybe the show's not starting up or whatever, how do you run your show? Do you run it off your laptop? Do you have a professional grade controller that's got the built-in director? Do you have a mini director? Do you have it on a timer? Do you have it, give us all of the information, and then that'll get you an answer really quick. Is this the first time you've had this problem? Is this not been a problem before? Talk about maybe what changed. It worked fine last year. It worked fine this year. I added this, and now it's not working. And obviously, definitely tell us, what you've already tried. One of the biggest things I've seen when people go out and ask for help that they get resistance on is somebody's like, I don't want to help you because you haven't tried yet yourself. And people I've observed tend to be very much more willing to help if you show that you've already put in the effort to try it for yourself. So tell us, here's what I've already done. That also helps us eliminate, what things to try, what things to troubleshoot. And then, one of the things to always just go ahead and check is, separate your data cables. Moving to, let's say one of your controllers just doesn't seem to be working. It has power, the cable is good, and all of your fixtures are good and all of that. make sure that you try using the other network jack. Maybe one of your network jacks is busted. And this is also where the LED status lights on your controller will tell you a lot about what's going on. Does it have power? Does it have data? Is the data only intermittent, depending on how you jiggle the wire? Let us know what you're seeing there, but look at those and make sure that everything is connected correctly as well. So before we go into questions, I want to show you two important things that are absolute wonderful time savers for me. One being, let me see, make sure my camera's set to where you can see what I'm doing. When we're making, I discovered this last year, when I'm making custom extension cords. Okay, cool, there's my camera. We were having the worst trouble last year with our vampire plugs not getting good connections. And for the life of me, I honestly still don't know why. Sometimes the vampire plugs just would not bite in well. Don't know why. But what we ended up doing was to, let's see if my video is on. I will stop my share for a moment. Aubrey, can y'all see my video okay?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. So like I said, I had no idea what was going on with my vampire plugs, that they didn't want to make good connections. And I made a lot of new extension cords last year. So it was a huge time sink for me. And then about halfway through, I realized, why am I not just testing my extension cords with a multimeter? These things are super easy to use, super cheap. They do 1,001 things that have absolutely no bearing on what we need it for. But I've got a multimeter here, and I'm going to turn it to what they call the ohm setting, OHM. And ohms are a measure of resistance. So I don't necessarily, in this use case, I don't need to know how much resistance the wire is giving me. I just need to know that it's connected. And so if the multimeter is able to measure resistance, that means that my extension cord has a connection. And that's all I needed to know. So what I started doing, let me see, what can I see? So I'm gonna put this to where you can see my multimeter. Some of these are digital, some are analog. For this, it doesn't really matter. You just need to be able to see. So what I would do is just put one prong of the multimeter on one of the prongs of the extension cord. And then I would put the other prong on the female end of my extension cord. I did not set this very well up so I can hold it with one hand. It's honestly tricky to do no matter what. Now I'm trying to show it on camera. So what you can do, see, there's the connection my needle is going over. So I know that this prong is connected to this side of the outlet. And then I would check the other side. And this, it's essentially you're just doing quality control on the building of your extension cords. And so that one's good. I mean, obviously this is a store-bought extension cord, so it better be good. And being able to do that sitting in my house with both ends right in front of me instead of running out and back and forth and plugging, it saved me so much time because I was constantly guessing, well, is it this end? Is it that end? Is it even the extension cord that's bad? And I was able to discover it was absolutely the extension cord. It was actually the vampire plugs. And I don't know what the deal is with them, but it's fine. I was able to get them reseated to where they bit and we're good. So, just a little bit of quality control there when you're building your extension cords saves you so much trouble down the road. And then the same thing, if you have an extension cord that, or especially if it's a custom one and it doesn't seem to be getting any power, then, check it with your meter and see if that's the deal. And then the other thing I want to talk about is this guy. They come in all kind of shapes. They're super cheap. You can get it for like $10 or $15 on the internet. They sell them, I'm sure, in network or hardware stores and things as well. It's a cable tester for network cables. So if you're buying a crimping tool, you might get the whole kit all in one. It might be worth doing. It's two separate parts. It's just a little receiver unit and a battery operated sending unit. And you plug in your one end of your network cable on one, and you plug the other end of the network cable on the other. Is that even the right one? Or is it this one? Goodness gracious, what the heck? Oh, other end. There's two sizes. I'm losing my mind. Oh my goodness. There's two different size receivers here for the other type of cable. So what I'm going to do, if I can get this to show correctly here, I'm just going to lay it down. So you plug one end on each, and then you turn it on, And your network cable tester is just going to go down each of the wires in the network cable. I think there's 8 wires in the cable, and it's going to show you what it's sending and where it's actually receiving it at. And so when you're building your custom network cables, or you have one that maybe you suspect isn't working right, you can just do this and you can run right through and see if all of the wires at the start and at the end are making a good connection. For $15, it's super worthy and easy to do. So that are 2 of my favorite tools to save me time. Do that, and then I want to reshare this, and that is all I have for you guys today. Let me hit share. Any questions? I've got 1,001 things in my head, but I only have so much time. So here we are.
That was perfect timing, Seth. So right almost at 46. So if anybody has questions, you can go ahead and unmute or go ahead and put them in chat.
Jim, you make a good point when you're talking about extension cords and being wired incorrectly. I don't disagree with you, absolutely. If you've found a malfunctional cord, you definitely want to destroy or make sure that it's not used. What I tend to do is actually take the bad end off, and obviously the good end off, or what have you as well. But there's kits you can get at the hardware store and basically make a new end. So it really depends on what's wrong with the extension cord. If it's a busted end, absolutely make sure it doesn't get into the wrong hands. But it's, electricity is absolutely no joke, and you got to be careful with it. But just, be aware that there are options to use that existing wire as well, if you don't want to recycle it, which, recycling is.
Oh, obviously you can fix it, but don't put it on the workbench and say, okay, I'll fix this tomorrow, and 6 months later it's still wired wrong, and you grab it because you totally forgotten about it. That was my point.
Right.
Cut the end off. That way it cannot be used until you get around to fixing it.
That I completely agree.
Seth, I think you either gave them all the information they need that they don't have any more problems, or maybe they're all typing at once. Who knows?
I scared them all. And for what it's worth, I'm in a lot of these groups as well. I'm always happy to jump in and give thoughts and ideas and advice when I can. Not always around, but
Don't know, Seth has a wonderful post that he usually comments with when people ask questions on Facebook. It is full of knowledge. So if you see a novel ever get posted in the comments, that is probably Seth.
That's me, absolutely guilty as charged. It's actually that post is now too big for Facebook. I have to do it in multiple posts because it exceeds the character limit. I need to put it on a standing web page somewhere. That's a project for another day. I'm going to go ahead and give you the screen back, Aubrey.
Perfect. I'm not going to take it.
You did a great job with this. I really appreciate all what you did.
Thank you.
Like Stephanie has a question. Oh, did you answer what your name of your light show is?
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't hear that one. So my show is JP, as in Jones Plaza, JP Christmas Lights. Our Facebook page is just facebook.com/JP Christmas Lights.
Any other questions? Otherwise, we can go ahead and end this. I'll give a little bit longer to see if anybody wants to speak up or type in the chat. All right, in that case, I'm going to call it here and say we're going to officially end the session. And thank you all for joining us. And thank you, Seth, for presenting. And thank you to Boscoyo and Light-O-Rama for their sponsorship. We are going to take a brief 5-minute, well, I guess 10-minute break here to switch presenters. And you're welcome to stay here, switch to another Zoom room, whatever you'd like. If you stay, just try not to unmute yourself so that the host can communicate if we need to. And don't forget that the closing session today is in the main Boscoyo room at 5 p.m. Eastern. So make sure you're over there in order to be qualified to win all of the raffle prizes. Thank you all for coming, and we will be back shortly with our next presentation.